The Food and Drug Administration is pushing for stricter vaccine guidelines after linking the deaths of at least 10 children to the COVID-19 vaccine. But now some medical experts are raising objections.
These claims come from an internal memo from Vinay Prasad, who is a top vaccine regulator with the FDA. He writes in this memo, for the first time, the U.S. FDA will acknowledge that COVID-19 vaccines have killed American children. Healthy young children who face tremendously low risk of death were coerced at the behest of the Biden administration via school and work mandates to receive a vaccine that could result in death. I have no doubt COVID vaccines were life-saving for an 80-year-old who never had COVID, but should a 20-year-old get his 6th dose this fall? These studies often fail to look at the balance for younger people. Prasad says his team analyzed 96 deaths and concluded that at least 10 of them were related to the vaccine, but the memo did not give specific details on how they came to that conclusion. Prasad is pushing for new guidelines that could impact other vaccines like the flu shot and could limit vaccines for pregnant women. Online, many people did agree with him and said the memo shows why the vaccine should not have been pushed on children. Outkick writer Ian Miller writes, remember Gavin Newsom's mandated COVID vaccines for all school children, comparing them to polio shots? Now we learn the FDA has found at least 10 children died as a result of COVID vaccines. Following incompetent experts was quite literally dangerous for children.
But there's also a great deal of skepticism over the report, with some who work in the medical field saying it's part of a broader anti-vax agenda from the Trump administration. Pediatrician Zachary Rubin writes on Blue Sky, quote, the FDA memo claiming the COVID vaccine killed at least 10 children relies on unverified reports from the CDC's vaccine adverse event reporting system and ignores real pediatric COVID data. If the agency wants credibility and truly believes in radical transparency, it must release the full evidence for independent review. And biologist Lucky Tran writes, quote, this is so reckless. The science shows us that COVID vaccines have saved millions of lives.
Well, but look, two things can be true. It can be the case that the COVID vaccine is life-saving for people who were at risk of a negative health outcome from COVID, which includes mostly just the elderly and people who are immunocompromised or are severely obese and who had not had COVID before. Then yes, as Vinay Prasad said, it absolutely makes sense for you to get the COVID shot if that fits your health profile. And people in that health profile who got the COVID shot had statistically demonstrated better health outcomes. Absolutely true. I'm not debating that whatsoever. It is simultaneously the case that young people, otherwise healthy young people, had a minuscule risk from COVID itself. It sounds like they have a minuscule risk from the vaccine as well, but it should be your choice at that point. That's all we're saying. For that doctor who said, well, they're looking at the VAERS data, that's the vaccine adverse reporting system, that looks at basically a list of anyone who died in conjunction with a vaccine. Doesn't mean it was necessarily caused by the vaccine.
Right.
But what Vinay Prasad is saying is they looked at this and they concluded 10 of them they think were caused by the vaccine itself. You can't write that off.
I understand that the goal of the administration is what they are perceiving, that they're telling the public that it's supposed to be, is for transparency. And so part of that requires there to be some coordination with people and experts that actually, physicians, like they're asking for full transparency. So release all information that would make independent sources be able to review it as well, and not just somebody on Trump's team saying, here's what we came up with, even though they could have died from a variety of causes. But I also am coming from a perspective that one kid dying from a COVID vaccine that wasn't necessary is too much. That's terrible. That's as a mom, there's no way that I would say, oh, well, there's going to be some casualties of war. That's not acceptable, especially when it was an option. I also was from the perspective when I was working during the pandemic, I wasn't allowed to come back to work unless I got a vaccine. And I was very unsettled about it because I was pregnant at the time. And I really had to make a tough decision, like keep my job, do something I really didn't want to do because I was pregnant. Like I was one of those people.
There you go.
I was the test case for that.
Interesting.
And luckily Kinsley's okay and I was okay. But you know, I have a relationship with Cuomo. We're good friends who's on News Nation, and he has many long-term COVID side effects. And we talk about that all the time. And I'm like, well, that's crazy because I had to make this tough choice and he's dealing with long COVID and always interviews his doctor about it. And so this is some of the things that have all been in my mind ever since then. And so I'm not completely against when you go off about how the pandemic and the COVID vaccine was handled.
I just
But I
want it to
do
be a
think that
choice.
people tried in the moment. We have to remember the moment. I really do believe that people and administration and leadership at the time really tried their best to just protect people in the moment, even though it was chaotic and some dramatic choices were made that you vehemently disagree with, like closing the schools for that long, or some of the policy choices. I do think that people really tried their best in an unprecedented situation to mitigate the risk. And so that included protecting older people who may be caretakers for some of these younger kids. They just did everything to stop this rampant spread that we saw.
You say everybody did their best, but I guess my pushback to that would be, it seems like the playbook for how to handle a pandemic was actually thrown out by experts in a moment of blind panic, because Fauci himself had initially said, well, the masks aren't going to do that much. And then when the public became terrified, said, actually, everybody wear masks constantly, even though the science of that had not really changed. And then we later learned that the mask, unless you're going to wear the strongest quality mask, it was not making a huge difference, or we couldn't find statistical evidence that was making a huge difference at a population level. That lockdowns were not going to work was also part of the initial playbook that got thrown out. So you said people did their best, and then we also, President Biden, I remember him saying, because I was I really didn't like the masks. I was very focused on mask mandates. I didn't like wearing them. I thought they really hamper my own socialization. I thought they were going to really hurt young people. They're learning to be socialized. So I was paying attention when Joe Biden said, for instance, I think he told some news reporter when he was running for president, I don't think there could be a national mask mandate. I'm like, okay, well, thank goodness. But then they did a vaccine mandate. I'm like, well, I don't know how you can, if you don't think you have the authority to make people wear a mask, how did you think you have the authority to force people to get an invasive medical procedure? So that was really bad to me, and people lost their jobs, like you're saying.
Yeah, it was really on the table.
Because they wouldn't
show
get
the proof, bring the card, or don't
said
work.
And again, I'm not against it. I got vaccinated. I got boosted. I would do so again. That's my choice. That's in consultation with my doctor, having to do with my health. I don't see how that right should be taken away from anyone else.
Well, some of this conversation, because I'm not going to argue with you. I think that it should have certainly been people's choices, but I think when now the conversation about the children that may or may not be linked to their deaths being linked to COVID is that they're going to tighten vaccine approval standards. So what that does, and the biggest issue that I saw from all this stuff, is that the changes could make it more difficult in the future for vaccines to get approved, specifically for people across the board as they're trying to find availability of vaccines.
I would oppose that for.
That's what I read. That
your choice, not a doctor's choice. Your choice.
Well, if Trump's team is successful at what they're trying to do, is saying that vaccines were too easily approved, this creates a lot of hurdles.
You say Trump's team, but that is not Trump's view.
No, but
this was
an NPR that the next steps of this, if they're saying that these were linked to children's deaths, is to rigorously review vaccines and how the new iterations of them come out. They're talking about the 6th COVID shot, I believe people are on. So there's no 7th and 8th without extensive review.
Wow.
And again, that's a choice. But now there's might not be an option because of the rigorous process that it has to go through. When most people that got the vaccine, I'm assuming, were okay. Again, I'll have to look at the numbers, but most didn't die from the vaccine. That was not.
Well, most people didn't die from COVID either.
Well, but I'm just saying it's still a choice, like you said. So if we take away the choice and don't continue forward.
For people outside the elderly and severely obese and in immunocompromised category, COVID is not a particularly dangerous disease anyway. So there's some exaggeration on both parts, is what I'm saying. And then also, the science just might not demonstrate that a 7th or 8th shot statistically improves your health outcome. Everyone on Earth at this point, 95% of people or more, have had COVID.
Well, I'm assuming that COVID will soon be looked at, again, no doctor over here, but I'm assuming that the further we get away from the actual pandemic and panic of it all, that COVID will be more like the flu. And so people may get shots every year, and it'll be an option just like the flu shot. That's that's what it's starting to become, and that's what I hope that it continues to be.
Right. I'm just saying, in their hesitance to recommend a 7th and 8th COVID shot might be, whereas I don't think you should be, the first COVID shot you should be able to get without any difficulty. It should be your choice. But they might not have the science to support having. Because remember, if this is the problem. If something is approved by the government in a medical capacity, that means it's going to be paid for by insurance, and the company is not going to be liable for any adverse conditions. It's not just saying, well, it's your choice. It's saying, it's your choice, but we're also recommending it, paying for it, and protecting the company that makes it from any liability. So they might not have the science to support that for a 7th or 8th shot. They might not have any science that shows taking this meaningfully improves your health outcomes in any way, shape, or form, such that we could conceivably pay for it and protect the company from any liability. Do you see what I'm saying?
I'm with you, and I think that the biggest thing would just be if the goal of the administration and everybody involved in this is transparency, just to provide more information about how inaccurate or accurate these vaccines have been now that we're on 6. I would like to know this information. I'm totally not the person that's in the streets like, yes, we should have worn masks, yes, we should have been vaccinated. I was just going with what I was told to do.
Yeah.
But I do think that we need more information to not just jump to conclusions when there's private data that's being researched and looked at by people, a certain select few of people, when the wider population just needs access to all the data that they have access to so that we can go to our doctors and make our decisions.
Vaccines, if you want. Masks, no thank you. Lockdowns, never again over my neighborhood.
Lockdown was a little bit fun. We bonded during lockdown.
Oh, God. Okay, let's move on. Famous actor Michael Douglas and Catherine Zeta-Jones are allegedly upset with CNN, and they want to blacklist the network. We'll explain why next.